Yeah, okay. Good evening, everyone. Welcome to this plenary session about refugees and migration. My name is Kadafi Zaman. I'm a journalist in Norway, working for TV2 Norway, covering national and international affairs. We have a very diverse and interesting panel today for our topic, which is how to help refugees in a sustainable way, both for the refugees and for the countries taking them in. To cover this topic, we have invited Dr. Ivan Attar, a prominent surgeon helping people who have fled conflicts in South Sudan, which he won the 2018 Nansen Refugee Award for. We have Professor Harald Bauder, who has focused on border studies and migration discourse for more than 20 years. We have Masoud Gharahkhani, member of the Norwegian Parliament, and also spokesperson for immigration and integration for the Norwegian Labour Party. And we are also honored to have Mr. Henrik Nordentoft from UNHCR, who has more than 30 years of experience in this area. So we definitely have a very competent panel. The topic today is that the world's refugee system haven't changed much since the Second World War. And experts from both sides argue that it's time for a renewal. So the question is, how can we shape the refugee system in a way that is sustainable for both the people who are fleeing and also for the countries who are taking them in? Is the answer to integrate them in Europe, or should the focus be on restoring their independence as third country nationals? And if that's the solution, how can we integrate them in third countries? So these are some of the questions will be discussed tonight. Each speaker will share their point of view with you. After that, we'll have a short break with the choir of the Student Society, internal choir here, which is quite famous in Trondheim and big parts of, actually in Norway. And in the end, then we'll have a session on the sofa here. There will become some sofas. And in the end, there will be opening for questions from the audience. So if you have questions, please write them down or remember them. There will be a microphone passed around. So I've also been told that after this session, because we have to leave here by 8 p.m. something, then our honorable guests will be at the Edgar Bar, if you have more questions. Now I would like to invite Mr. Nordentoft to the stage. He is the head of the UNHCR regional representation for Northern Europe, based in Stockholm, covering the Nordic countries and the Baltic states. Mr. Nordentoft has worked for UNHCR for over 30 years with field postings in Africa, the Middle East, and Asia. He's also been assigned to the headquarters in Geneva. Welcome, sir.
Thank you. Frankly, let me just start by saying what a great honor it is to be able to speak to you all here today at the International Student Festival. Such a prestigious event every 2 years, fabulous participation of students from all over the world, and also which has gathered a number of world-renowned speakers. We have one tonight from South Sudan that I hope you will enjoy. Thanks also for Tyler for deciding that this year's festival would focus on migration. I think really it is a topic of our times, and it's going to be a topic of your times. It's here to stay with you. I'm also quite humbled to be here with Dr. Attar from South Sudan, who's going to speak later. He's a 2018 Nansen Award winner for his outstanding contribution to humanitarian action and to the humanity at heart, and he will speak much more in detail about what he's doing. We're here, as Saman said, to discuss how to create or change a new system because the current system is old. Well, let me warn you here. People who are suggesting that we should change systems just because they are old may have other ulterior motives. We should talk about how can we improve the existing systems. So I'll first talk to you a little bit about why I'm relevant and why we are relevant to talk about that. My organization, the United Nations High Commissioner for Refugees, the UN Refugee Agency, we've been around since 1950. We have 15,000 staff members. We're present in 120 countries, and we have a global mandate and a global responsibility directly from the General Assembly to provide international protection and finding durable solutions to refugees. And we've done that for the past 70 years, not alone, but in collaboration with partners, with states, with governments, with non-governmental organizations, including the Norsk Refugee Council, Norwegian Refugee Council, of course, and many, many others. When we look at the question, therefore, it is not about creating a new system. I'm going to talk to you about that there is a system already. The system actually works for the large part. It can be improved, but it is there. Secondly, the system is sustainable. The question is not whether it's not sustainable. That is a lot of European dialogue around it. It is sustainable in the world. The question is how do we make it better and more sustainable over time? And also, thirdly, we may miss a dimension if we only talk about refugees. Refugees, as you know, are people who have left their country. But what about the 40 million people who have fled conflicts, violence inside their own countries? They are called internally displaced persons, and they equally also deserve our attention. So let's just first look at what is the system. The current system is based on a refugee convention, an international agreement signed on to by 150 countries in the world. The system actually is complemented by another international agreement, the 67 Protocol. It has binding obligations. It defines who is refugees. It defines how we need to treat and welcome refugees. It was born in the aftermath of the Second World War, but it was born in order to deal with the consequences of that. Has it been sustainable? In Americas, it has evolved with the CIREFCA agreement. In Asia, there has been local agreements. And the system is not just those who have signed the convention. We have refugees in many countries that have not signed the convention. In Pakistan, over 2 million people, 3 million people. In Thailand, they have not signed the convention, and yet they protect refugees. In Jordan, Lebanon, they protect several million refugees they have not signed. In Turkey, they have not signed the full convention with regard to everyone, and yet they protect refugees. So frankly, there is a system already that works where states know how to try to collaborate together. Sustainability, number 2. Has it been sustainable? Is it possible to have a sustainable refugee system? Well, I will venture that it is. This convention, 1950s, has been able to adapt to a number of different situations. The Hungarian exodus, the Middle East crisis, the war in the Balkans that was very close to us, South Africa's liberation fights, etc., etc. It has adapted, it has evolved, and it continues to evolve. It is not a static system. So what is the real question we should ask ourselves today? I think the number one question is actually not about refugee flows and how do we deal with the flow. The flow is a symptom of another problem. What we really should be focusing on is how do we prevent and end conflict. That is the number one issue. So that's the first one. Secondly, if there is conflict and so on, and if people are forced to flee, how can we make sure that there is sufficient global and international solidarity to try to deal with the consequences so that it is not just dealt with by one country, but dealt with by more countries in the world? And 3, how to make sure we all play together. How can we make sure everybody takes their part of this global challenge and that the plight is not just following on one country? And why am I saying that? Just as a reminder, of the 27 million refugees we have today in the world, 27, 28 million, 70% comes from 3 crises in the world: Afghanistan, Syria, and South Sudan. These 3 crises, if they were solved, we would go a long way to solve the world's refugee problems. Secondly, 85% of the world's refugees are not in Norway, They are not in Sweden, they're not in Germany, even though some politicians would love us to believe that. They are in the neighboring countries. They are in Uganda, they are in Pakistan, they are in Turkey, they are in Thailand, etc., etc. So the world's refugees are actually already living amongst host communities. So the question we have to ask is, in a way, first of all, how do we prevent, avoid situations that cause refugee flows? This is about prevention, and the Secretary General is working very hard, Mr. Antonio Guterres, who was previously the High Commissioner for Refugees for 10 years. He's working very hard to try to mobilize the international governments, but the United Nations, of course, does not have much more power than the combined power of the world's governments. And there, I think you all know there is a challenge. How do we prevent conflicts from escalating beyond belief? How do we then resolve conflicts at the end? How do we bring peace to it? And I think you all have seen, and you have your own special envoy for Syria, Geir Pedersen, at the moment, trying to be the special envoy for Syria, struggling to try to see whether he can create a situation of peace. These are, in a way, the real big challenges. And also then, of course, you can say, even if we solve all the world's problems, how can we avoid human rights violations and persecution and oppression against groups and individuals? Because that's, of course, also a press. These are the big questions. And we also know that there has been attempts of preventing wars, of pretending of solving conflicts, and of course we have not been very successful. All the interventions we have had over the last 10, 15 years, and that you as youth have experienced, starting with Iraq, going on to Afghanistan, and then Syria, or the other way around, those three are all miserable failures. We've actually created refugee problems, we've actually created more misery rather than trying to think what has been solved. And South Sudan, Dr. Atta, as you know, what a tragedy. The latest member of the United Nations, we celebrated its independence in 2011. It became the member of the United Nations in 2013, and then here we are, senseless power struggle between two leaders, each one fighting for power, causing millions of people to flee, unheard suffering, and so on. It is incredible that the world community can just watch that this happens, frankly. So let's go talk about, if we can't solve the war, if we can't prevent, if we can't escalate, what do we do? Global solidarity, that's the whole question. And what is happening? I have some good news for you. So I have 7 minutes, now I have 2 minutes. Global solidarity, there are some good news. It's not all bad and doom and gloom. There was a global compact. Some of you may have heard there were 2 global compacts discussed, a global compact on migration and a global compact on refugees, and they got a lot of dust in the air and a lot of discussion, a lot of debates in many places. The global compact on refugees was adopted by the General Assembly with a large, overwhelming majority of all the nations in the world. That was adopted in December this year. It built on a joint commitment from governments, reaffirming again their commitments for a better sharing of the global solidarity and responsibility for refugees. It basically brought together all the countries that are hosting refugees, all the countries that are providing funding, all the providing political support to try to do a couple of things in order to make refugee management sustainable. First of all, that refugees should not be confined to camps and be segregated off into a special society, but that refugees in the world should try to be allowed to integrate gradually in a society, temporarily until they can go back, meaning being able to actually be self-reliant, get access to jobs. And we've seen good progress. There is possibilities in Uganda where refugees are given small plots of lands to be self-sufficient very quickly. Ethiopia has just extended refugee permits to over 100,000 refugees, work permits. There is investments needed. Of course, work permits doesn't do it if there's no industry to do it. And there again, the Global Compact has reunited also the private sector. Our High Commissioner was in Davos, the big Swiss World Economic Forum, talking to all the big economic industries, talking about how it is important that we create jobs and we create industries also in refugee-affected areas. It's also about making access, that refugees have access to services. Refugees need access to education and so on, and we have in the past very often made that a parallel system run by NGOs. The Global Compact tries to move to a different deal, which is let's take refugee children into existing national services, and then let's boost them financially, boost them economically, because these are the system that serves. Thirdly, host communities. In the past, it is true, host communities were not benefiting always in the same way that they should. Host communities that are receiving refugees, and these are the 85%, right? So we talk about host communities impacted by the arrival of refugees, impacted in terms of cattle, impact in terms of natural resources. They're the ones that also need to benefit. And here the Global Compact for Refugees is bringing new changes for them as well, making an integrated approach towards it. So there is hope ahead. It is not as bad as it sounds. Yes, there are many challenges, and we will discuss some of them today, but I hope that through the questions that you may ask, we will make this debate a global discussion. And we need your perspectives about how you in your respective countries are seeing that challenge, how you are experiencing it. It'll be very interesting to hear your views. I'm dealing with forced displacement. Other panelists will deal with internal displacement or migration and so on. But I really welcome it and look forward to also discuss with those of you who will join us in the bar afterwards. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Mr. Nordentoft, for a very interesting speech. Our next guest is a very prominent scholar, Mr. Harald Bauder. He's a professor at the Ryerson University in Canada. He's been in this field for 20 years, written 3 books, Putting Family First, Immigrant Experiences in North America, and Migration, Borders, Freedom. Welcome, Professor Bauder.
I suppose I was selected to be on this panel to present the academic perspective, and academics are not always known for their practicality. So we see how my ideas are holding up later on in the discussion on the sofa. I really want to raise only 2 points. In my 7 minutes, it's a very short time. I don't have much time to elaborate much more. The first point is when I read the description of this session, it starts with how can we create a refugee system that is sustainable for both the people fleeing war and crisis and the countries taking them in. And when we talk about sustainability, I was first thinking of the 2030 UN sustainability goals. And there were a number of social development aspects in there. But what it did not include the freedom of movement and settlement as development goal. And that, I think, would have a lot to do with addressing at least refugee and migration issues at the same time. Instead, we ended up with a global compact for the safe, orderly, and regular migration, and a global compact on refugees. But I think if we are serious about global social justice, then we cannot claim rights to mobility for ourselves, that is people like me from the global north, and at the same time deny these same rights to others, namely people from the global south. And that brings me to a research topic that I've pursued over the last several years, and that is the topic of open borders. Open borders is an idea there's a literature arguing for open borders from all kinds of different perspectives. For example, there are free market economists that suggest, well, borders are a distortion of the labor market, and therefore labor should be free and we should have open borders. There's a political economy perspective, for example, that suggests that borders are a mechanism of labor exploitation and therefore we should have open borders, and all kinds of other philosophical perspectives that argue for this. And I think we might have an opportunity to introduce a narrative of open borders into the general debate of refugees and migration. We do this already with free trade. We have a narrative of free trade in our economic discussions on how we should regulate trade. Now, this open borders idea, it doesn't challenge nation states. It doesn't challenge the Westphalian global order. It simply suggests there are states, they have territories, they have territorial boundaries, and then we should think about opening these borders up for people to move freely. We already do this for money, we do this for trade, the environment doesn't respect these borders, so why not do it also for people? That's the first idea. The second point that I want to make is that our frame of reference is always the nation state when we talk about migration and refugee issues. It's a nation state that regulates and decides who can go where and under what circumstances. But what we are observing today, and that brings me again to another research topic that I've been pursuing for a number of years now, is that cities are assuming a much greater role in taking an active role in participating in this process and in the conversation. My own research has dealt with so-called sanctuary cities in Canada and the US. And sanctuary cities, what they do is they protect non-status migrants and refugees from the national authorities that would actually like to deport them. And the problem here is that the nation state illegalizes people, takes away, denies them rights, but cities say, well, you belong to our community. You send your kids to school here, you go shopping in the same places I go shopping, you work in the same places, we're in the same cricket team or the same soccer team, so why should you not belong to my urban community? So there are very different perspectives between the urban community's perspective and the nation state. In Europe, we are talking increasingly about solidarity cities. So the label is a little bit of a different one. It's not sanctuary cities, but solidarity cities. And that includes places like Barcelona, Palermo, Naples, Syracuse. They are rejecting national refugee politics. And a network of solidarity cities are emerging across Europe, and actually, one might argue even globally. In Germany, for example, cities that are not on the coast, like Berlin or Osnabrück, they want to accept refugees directly and say, come here and we're going to work with Naples and Barcelona and other places that are at the coast, and we're going to have a deal to accept refugees directly. So this network is an international solidarity network among cities. And I find this very, very interesting, how cities are assuming, want to participate in the conversation and assuming an active role. So I wonder, just to conclude here, if we are observing a rescaling of refugee and migration politics away from the nation state towards the city, and whether the nation state is of diminishing importance here, also with the first point that I've been making. And this then raises, of course, the question, is the nation state failing to regulate migration and refugee protection? And is what we are observing perhaps a symptom of this failure? Thank you.
Thank you very much, Professor Bauder. Our next guest is, he came to Norway as a refugee many years back. He's a very famous politician in Norway. He's a member of the Norwegian Parliament for the Labour Party, and he's also a spokesperson for the integration and immigration policies of the Labour Party. Welcome, Mr. Masoud Gharahkhani.
First of all, thank you for the invitation to the International Student Conference Festival here in beautiful Trondheim. And when you get invited to an international festival, you should know that it's in English, but I didn't know that. I found out 2 weeks ago. So the last 2 weeks I've tried to tune in on my English language. And if you hear some New Jersey accent there, it's because I love Tony Sopranos. Okay, let's get serious. I think it's bold that you are putting migration on the agenda. One of the most difficult but important topics discussed in the world are how do we manage migration, refugee crisis we are in. And last year, the Norwegian Social Democratic Party, the Labour Party, which I represent, we looked through our migration and integration policy. And we have proposed major new policies on the migration and integration era. And I see already when we got a new government, they have copied a lot of those proposals. And I think that's good, because we need more bipartisanship in working together on the refugee crisis. So now I have 6 minutes left on presenting what we have worked in 1 year. Before we started to work on migration and integration, we had some preconditions. and that's the Social Democratic Party. We don't want open borders. We have never stand for open borders. The population has to be on board. If you manage the balance, migration and integration, if the people see that integration is failing, you don't have the population on board on taking refugees. That's a fact. We must help as many people as we can with the resources we use today. That the quota system is the fairest way. People coming through the UN's fair queue system to Norway. And all the solutions we are proposing must be with our international commitments, such as the Geneva Convention. Unfortunately, we are living in a world where 68 to 70 million people are fleeing from different conflicts. 25 to 27 million of them are recognized as refugees by the UN. 85% of them are living in neighboring countries to those conflicts. Many living under bad conditions. And our policy making has been, how can we help more of these people in a better way, and at the same time, be realistic? How can we have a predictable migration to Norway, and how can we manage border control to Norway? As a Social Democratic Party, we want to maintain the right for people to seek asylum. That's important for us. But we have also asked ourselves, are there challenges with today's asylum system? Unfortunately, it is. It's inhumane, unfair, and unsustainable. It's inhumane because it's driven by smugglers, cynical organizations. The death route over the Mediterranean Sea. Think of this, the most deadliest border. Over 22,000 people had drowned. It's unfair because if you have money, you can pay smugglers. If you don't have money, you stay in neighboring country for a very, very long time. And for me, as a social democrat, there's something wrong with the idea that cash, money, decides if you get protection or not. And it's unsustainable, and why? In 2014, from the eastern route, which is from Turkey over to Greece, it came 50,000 people to Europe seeking asylum. The start of the migration crisis in 2015, many of us remember the pictures and what we saw in the news daily. It came 885,000 persons. Today in Europe, some countries respect the right to seek asylum, others do not. And we are afraid that if we do not think about new solutions now, when a new migration crisis comes, more countries will not respect the right to seek asylum. So, what do we want to achieve? A fairer and more sustainable asylum system to help the host countries and refugees in them, more predictable immigration to Norway. A fair asylum system. We want to go from asylum application at the border to quota refugee through the UN. And how do we want to do that? We want more third country solutions. What is third country solutions? It's like the deal between EU and Turkey. If you are a Syrian refugee, you come from Turkey over to Greece, you will be sent back. Because the countries must, in Europe, take quota refugees. We think that's fair to do. Something we want to do alone or with a Nordic country and at the best with other European countries. And we do not want to do that because we don't want to help. We want to help, but we want to do it in a fair way. We do not want the smugglers to be running the asylum system. We are doing this because we want people to come through the fair and sustainable EU quota to Norway. And if we want to make deals with third countries, we must make sure that our international conventions are clear. And then we propose a solidarity fund for hosting countries. One of the most recognized people discussing refugee policy in the world is Betts and Collier. Maybe many of you may have heard of them. They are talking about the unfairness in the system where rich countries, Norway is a rich country, and many rich countries, they use $1 in neighboring countries where 85% of the refugees are, and at the same time they use $135 on the refugees in their own countries. We need to help the neighboring countries more. Norway is a humanitarian country, and I'm proud of that. Yearly, we are giving 5 million kroner to essential needs, like water, like clothes, like medicine. But we need to do more. We need to give the refugees opportunities and possibilities, that they can get education, healthcare, the possibility to get jobs, and we want more projects. Therefore, we are proposing 5 billion kroner more each year, helping projects, giving refugees access to the local job markets in the areas they are, so they can get a future. They can supply themselves, and the day their country is more safe again, they can go back and build it up again. Lastly, we need an immigration policy that promotes integration and secures predictability. That means the balance between migration and integration to Norway. It's important that the refugees coming to Norway are followed up good, that they learn the Norwegian language, give them education, possibility to get jobs, and self-reliant. And therefore, we want to listen to our municipalities. How many refugees can you take in each year? And we want to see how many refugees can we take each year in a country which has a welfare system in Norway, at the same time being sustainable for the future. And what is the international criteria? And be in a negotiation between the municipalities and the government on how many refugees are Norway going to take each year and over time. We want to achieve two things with that. One, more predictable migration, so we can get integration better in Norway than we are doing today. And two, having people on board. We need to have people on board. Then it will be more accept for taking more responsibility for the future. So overall, what we are proposing is a more fair asylum system, and that's what I had the time in my 7 minutes to present to you, and I look forward to a good discussion afterwards. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Gharahkhani. Now we've heard a politician, we've heard a professor, we've heard a United Nations expert, and the time has come to what we would say our chief guest, Mr. Dr. Evan Attar Adaha, which is a surgeon and a doctor in South Sudan. He is the winner of the United Nations Etsiar Nansen Refugee Award. And I'll have some more time with your presentation, Doctor, because you've come all this way. Dr. Attar got this award because of his outstanding commitment and self-sacrifice in providing medical service to over 200,000 people, including 144,000 refugees. So this is a man on the ground. I would also like to just read a little bit from the Nansen Refugee Award, just a few sentences. The hospital where Dr. Attar works, it says, the facility has no general anesthesia, meaning doctors work with spinal epidurals and injections to numb pain. The hospital's only X-ray machine is broken. The operating theater is lit with a single light, and electricity is provided by aging generators that often break down. In this environment, Dr. Attar sometimes works 48 hours non-stop. He is on call at all hours and often delivers as many as 7 babies by cesarean sections a week. The personal sacrifice that he makes is huge. He lives close to the hospital in a simple tent, while his family lives in Nairobi, Kenya. He manages to visit them just 3 times a year during short breaks to recover from his grueling medical work. A big applause for Dr. Athar, please.
Thank you. I'm really humbled to be invited to this conference. I have been with the refugees. I will simply talk about what is it really that affects them, how they are facing their own problems. I will begin with the definition, my own definitions that I can give to a refugee. A refugee is a person like you and me. The only difference is that refugees have lost all. In some cases, they lost their loved ones, materials, all this. To become a refugee is not a choice. As we have talked about wars, violence, persecutions. These are the things that force the refugees, or that turns human beings to be refugees. They face so many problems. Our problem is we have divided them, the refugees and internally displaced persons, that is IDPs. All of them moved from one part to another, seeking security. We come to where the refugees go. In most cases, the refugees move to one country to another, a neighboring country. This was the normal things which had been happening all these years. Sometimes they are not welcomed by the host communities. And the problem becomes bigger. Allow me analogize it. All of us have at least 2 baskets in our hearts. One basket is full of compassion, love, and care. The other is full of fear, sometimes hatred. It is totally our choice to choose which basket can we offer to the refugees from our own hearts. They don't have anything. They can't cope up with the situations where they are. They need help. We have to help them. At the personal level, at the community level, and government levels. That is the beginning. That is the beginning of the life of the refugees when they flee to one country. In some countries, they are welcome with the kind people who will offer them literally everything, and they will share whatever they have. But because of the fear of sharing the small resources some individuals have, including the jobs, they are always turned down. In this, the resources we have are limited. But the number of refugees keep on increasing. I'm just talking about the refugees in a small area, but I'm also reading the plight of the refugees in other regions. Let us welcome the refugees. They are part of us. And let us share whatever, the little we have, to make it a good place for us to live together with the refugees. We have been looking for solutions. And that's why we're talking about the sustainable ways of maintaining the refugees. It's only when all of us unite and work together you can offer a refugee as an individual a place. You can welcome into your house. As a community, as a country. Out of the definitions I have given, any of us can become a refugee at any time. They are not criminals, but the situation of war, violence, and persecutions is the one which has made them victim of those situations. If we look over, when I was still a student, you were able to count the number of wars in the world. But today, the number is increasing madly. The most important is that the international community, the stakeholders in those countries, should not leave any stone unturned for the sake of peace. We should look for the peace in those countries. This is the only way which can bring down the number of refugees. Modality could be so many of solving the problem. But I strongly believe that it's only that when peace is achieved in those countries, this is where the refugees will be returning home. That is the only solution, and that is the hope of all the refugees I met. They always talked. They want peace to come so that they go back and continue their normal life. In those refugees camps, they are desperate. There are so many things in their mind. They are thinking of the future of their children. Sometimes the children go without education. Even the basic needs are very difficult to attain. We talked of food. We talk of water and sanitation. And we talk services, like health services and education. These are the most important things that any of us would like to have. Yes, we can mobilize the resources, but these resources will not really sustain the growing number of the refugees. So the most important thing is to get peace in those countries. It may be complex, difficult, but I strongly believe that if the whole world comes as one, I don't think there is anything which will be difficult. Peace will be attained in those warring parts of our globe. In conclusion, let us offer the refugees all what we have. They are our brothers, sisters, daughters, sons, and we are part of them. We can't leave them to suffer alone. But let us share the little, and all of us will be happy. Thank you so much.
Thank you very much, Dr. Attar, and the rest of our speakers. Now it's a great honor to present Knauskora, the in-house choir of this student society. After that, it will be a short break, and then we'll continue with our discussion. Please welcome Knauskora.
A welcome from us, all of us, to all of you here to Norway. Welcome to the stunning nature here, and especially the mountains.
Don't
I've always wondered, some countries, they take a lot of refugees, some takes few, but you also have some countries who don't take any refugees or migrants or anything at all. We have examples in East Europe, we have examples in the Gulf states, also other countries. What does the United Nations and your organization and agency do to push those countries who don't take anyone, receive anyone? How do you push them, or do you push them at all?
Yeah, sure, we are concerned, of course, when countries close their borders to refugees. But it's not just about whether United Nations can push states. It's actually about values. And unfortunately, there are now forces in Europe, forces in the world, that basically are giving up on those values of humanity that Dr. Atta spoke so beautifully about. We have a value crisis. We have a humanitarian crisis. We have questioning human rights suddenly because it's inconvenient to stand up for the oppressed. You youths who stand out there in all your different countries, you need to stand for those values. You need to stand for that future. This is not something that the United Nations is going to help alone. That has to come from inside. The political discourse in the world, in many ways, is every country for him and herself. That's not the future that we need. The refugee problem, the climate problem, the migration challenges that we have in the world, they are global challenges. There's not a single country that can close them at all. And what happens at the moment is that the countries are going hermit into their little shelf and saying, just we are protected from the problem, then we'll send some money away and then we'll deal with it. That's not the solution. But of course, we are in contact with all these countries. The High Commissioner is visiting them. They are talking to them. We're using the European Union. The European Union, which was supposed to be an area where there could be solutions, and Norway is attached in a way in some of those discussions, is not being able to find common grounds. What is that causing then? When we see Italy closing its borders, saying we don't get a fair deal. So it is unfortunately a domino effect at the moment. But let's not forget, and just as you said, the host communities in Uganda, 1 million people. Lebanon, over 1 million people. 1 in 5 is a refugee in Lebanon. Did those populations stand in the border and say, we want a quota system? Could you please apply by the UN? No. They took them in because they had the humanity values. They were brothers. There was a legacy. Was it heavy for them to do it? Yes. Did it create conflict sometimes? Yes. Were we able to solve them? Yes. I think what Dr. Atta said before was it's a lack of peace in the world, the lack of resolving the issues that prevents people from going home. And therefore we see very sadly these protracted crises. And as you will know, and as we've discussed, some of the crises are going on in average for 15, 18, 20 years. The old days' ability to sort of solve some crisis, unfortunately, is not functioning at the moment. And this is maybe one of the biggest challenges. And for those of you who are going to be diplomats or politicians, good luck to you. I wish you well. Thank you.
Masoud, as we're listening now, there are countries taking millions of people. You have Jordan, you have Lebanon, Turkey. Yeah. Shouldn't a rich country like Norway receive more refugees? Last year it came 2,600 asylum seekers, 2,600 to Norway. That's like the lowest since the 90s. When you hear this, shouldn't like you and your party be in the front and say, well, when the numbers are so low, we should receive many more?
You know, well, you must be honest. You know, Norway is in the top of the world right now. When we see population and how many quota refugees we're taking. We are in the top of the world, both Norway and Canada, actually. And I'm proud of that. And I think it's important that we are taking that responsibility.
Top of the world means like a couple of thousand?
We are taking 3,000 now, quota refugees each year. And when you see compared to population, we are in the top of the world. And we had your boss coming to Norway and said, wonderful. But we need more help. I can understand that. And I think Norway must do two things. Yes, we must take quota refugees because they are the most vulnerable refugees in the world. And many of them going to stay in hosting countries without any opportunities. But how many? I mean, that's important. We have to have people on board. We must manage integration. You know, I'm a realist. I'm a politician. I have to be a realist. And I think, if we like it or not, for a rich country that Norway is, if we want to help many people, we must help more in neighboring countries. As I told you, we use each year 5 billion kroners in humanitarian aid. That's good. Many of them go to cooperation with your organization. But we must do more. Like the projects you said in Uganda, you're giving refugees opportunities, opening local market for jobs. I can understand if you're a hosting community that you're afraid of opening the local market for refugees, because then your own people come and say, what about us? But if you know countries like Norway, and I want to think about solutions with other Nordic countries, it's divided discussing migration in Europe. I've been to the European Parliament. Norway is a part of Schengen, Dublin. Some people say open borders. I think that's not both politically or the people want that. So we have to be realistic. That's my view. And some people say we don't want any at all. So we can sit and say, okay, that's the world we're living in, or we can do something. And my party said, okay, let's see a new system. Third country solutions. We take quota refugees back, but we have predictable migration to Norway. And at the same time, supporting the hosting countries more in the future. I think it's important.
Dr. Bauder, when you listen to this, you promote free borders. You've written also books about it. When you hear today Masoud Gharaqani's solution or their view that more help in the neighboring countries and not so much like don't receive too many in Norway because it's not sustainable. Is it a good solution?
Well, I think one of the issues is the national lens to begin with. That the nation state decides who can cross borders, be it migrants or refugees, and keeping people out. Providing some people with status, refugee status, others with immigration status, segueing them into citizenship very quickly. And I think this national lens probably creates more problems than solutions. And in my opening remarks, I think that the solutions lie elsewhere. If we're thinking outside of the box and we do not have to accept that the national lens at the nation state should be the prime agent in regulating migration or refugee intake flows. I think this is the perspective that we have to break open and move beyond. And I mentioned that one possibility might be cities, especially in terms of belongings, but also the solidarity city networks, that cities are expressing their solidarity to each other and say, look, we help you out, and we might still need to ask the nation state to permission to let people in, but we can do this as cities. We can do this within an urban network.
But how, I don't understand that. If Norway as a country says we have a quota of 3,000 refugees, can the city of Trondheim say, no, we want 30,000? Can London say, can Paris say, how can the cities of major European countries say something different than the governments?
Well, they are saying that.
No, in practical, is it practical? Is it like happening right now?
I think it's incredibly practical. If a place like, I know the German cases because that's where I'm living temporarily at the moment. A city like Osnabrück, a smaller city, or a city like Berlin says, give us the refugees. We want that and that many, and we want to, this is our solidarity to places like Barcelona, to Naples. The issue is at the moment still that the nation state, the Ministry of Interior in Germany, has to say, yes, we permit that. But why should that not be something, for example, just an example, let cities help each other? I mean, that would be one way of thinking outside the box and getting away from this nation-state frame, which I think creates more problems than solutions.
Dr. Tar, you are on the ground, you are on the field, working for 20 years. The people you meet, do they want to come to Europe, or they want to go back to their own homes and their own country, or what do they want when they meet you?
Yeah, most of the people from Blue Nile would like actually to go back home. And I think they have no idea about coming to Europe. But if you compare the refugee camps, for instance, in Uganda, in Kenya, Kakuma, because what they were giving them, they call it resettlement. They used to have some interviews. They do the interviews. When they qualify for it, then they are taken for resettlement. We have seen a number of them gone to Canada, Australia, US, and I think this is the system which was there in those refugee camps. But here now in Maban, refugee camps, I think none of them is talking about it because it has not yet happened in Maban. But in Charcoal in Ethiopia, a number of people were also taken. So they will also kind of try to repeat the same what had happened before. The resettlement, I think, is something that is in those camps, but not in Maban yet.
Russell?
Dr. Attar said something very important, because sometimes when you discuss this in Europe, everybody thinks everyone wants to come to Europe. That's not the case. But when you don't have any opportunities at all, because it's two ways, and 3 ways, but mostly 2 ways for most of the refugees today. You go to a refugee camp, and in some camps you have several generations living there still. Or you go to a local community in a hosting country. You don't have the possibility to get education, to work, nothing. So I think Europe must understand that better, that we must support those hosting communities to give the refugees more opportunity in the future. And I want to comment what he said about, I think it's not possible if you say, Trondheim can decide itself. I'm talking about Norway, or Oslo, or Drammen, where the city I come from. You have to have something. This must be on something a country decides. But what we have proposed is a new model. Each year we have a lot of discussion in the parliament, a very divided discussion. And instead of thinking about like that, do we want to take 3,000, 2,000? Let's ask the municipalities, as I said, how many refugees can you take each year? Ask them. And you have a negotiation between parliament and the municipalities, and you say, this is what Norway can take each year. And what you say, and when you see quota refugees, asylum seekers are those coming to the border. And reunification together, less asylum at the border means more quota refugees. Then we have more predictable numbers, I think.
Yeah, I'll make 2 or 3 quick points. First of all, I think while open borders, some may say in this room, naive, where's the professor coming from? He is not practical. When he's saying about the solidarity of cities, what is he saying? He is saying that there is apparently citizens' support for doing it. It is actually the question of whether the politicians only are the ones that decides what the value system is. So I think that is the interesting part. So what you're saying is, in a way, there is solidarity. What we see in Europe at the moment is that political parties are moving more and more to the right because they believe that all the voters are in the right. And frankly, I know that the parties are saying we're trying to follow our voters. They're out there. But I think the voters are the silent majority. What is a vocal majority on social media and everywhere is the one that is hijacking the debate. Most of us, on many of you, maybe that have some different values, apparently we're not managing to be coming through with our value system and explaining what there is. So I think in a way, the thinking of solidarity, and to just also to say to Harold, and he knows that, the cities are actually one of the most important instruments today to receive refugees. It is not in the camps. It happens in Montevideo. It happens in Bogota. It happens in many places around the world. And many of you, of course, also know refugees are not just out there. They are living with us and how to manage it. Second point, what you also said, Dr. Attar, about the internally displaced persons. Norway is trying to promote more attention on the high-level panel in New York to try to look at internally displaced persons. We talk about 40 million, not the ones we talk about here now. We talk about those that we actually cannot access to. The ones that Dr. Attar is treating with a malfunctioning X-ray system, with a malfunctioning thing. We are not able sometimes to get the humanitarian system in these countries. And why are we not? Because of conflict, because of bombs, because it is difficult to get the humanitarian access, South Sudan being one of the, as you know, one of the most complex countries to do. And thirdly, just to say that on this question on quota, and we talk about it a lot, it's not either or, it is both. You cannot create a fortress Europe that basically says it's only access by ticket and admission. It has to be both, otherwise the global system will collapse in it, because we don't talk about 3,000 resettlement places, right? We talked about 25, 26 million people. So what we really need to discuss if we're going into a quota system is how do we divide the 26 million people? Is that what we're going for? I don't think so, and therefore the thinking around a quota system for Europe is closing up Europe in a way that I think is not helpful.
So you mean the idea of Masoud that his party is not...
Not just his idea. There are discussions about can we replace, you referred to Alexander Betz and Paul Collier. They are discussing whether the system is broken so that we need to revert to that whole system, that it's only entry by admission. But that seems to be Europe saying that. Europe saying entry by admission. Some other states are saying entry by an admission ticket. It is not realistic in the global refugee system to do like that. And if Europe wants to show the way it has done, and it's interesting that Europe showed a lot of way in the 80s. When there were not so many refugees, Europe dictated the European values, the human rights values of the world. And as soon as they came home too close to the country, there was suddenly another reflection on how we should manage the system. So there is an evolution here, but let's also not, and sorry, my last point, we have another problem, and this is, of course, the fact that we are not talking just about a refugee flow. The people who today are coming across the Mediterranean, and I'll be the first one to recognize that, is, of course, what we say a mixed migration flow. It is both people moving for prosperity reasons, trying to get a better life, coming out of misery. And it's true that, of course, they equally deserve, and I think that's what Harold will say, they deserve also a better chance. My agency, of course, we stand as an agency for forced displacement, so we have that mandate. We don't have a migration mandate, and that's why there were two different compacts. And obviously, in our world, there is a difference in the way we treat refugees and the way that migrants that does not have that forced displacement status are treated. Dealing with migration is a much more complex aspect, and I think that requires big investments in those areas where migration are coming from. UNHCR at the moment are in Libya. We are dealing with horrible situations. Those of you who have seen some of the Libya situations, I can advise you to look at BBC on YouTube, BBC Ross Kemp, Inside the Hell in Libya. I think when you see that, you realize that the world needs to do more, and that we cannot end up having Libya as a holding center for the world's refugees. Thank you.
Mr. Masoud, you promote the quota system. But who decides the quotas? Like, who picks the refugees? Like, for example, Norway is picking. Why is Norway receiving any Rohingyas, for instance?
You know, each country decides themselves what kind of criteria they want.
And what are the criteria of Norway?
Norway have prioritized vulnerable, like women that have been abused. And we have said that, you know, I respect Canada. They're taking a lot of quota refugees each year. But the difference between, for example, Norway and Canada is mostly picking up those who have high education from before. And that's important for them. But we have said in our model, we want to prioritize the vulnerable, families. So that each country can decide themselves how they want to pick up and what kind of criteria they want.
But it's not like because I was wondering, I was in Bangladesh a couple of years back to make a story about Rohingyas, and I'm still not seeing any Rohingyas in Norway, or I don't know. Is there any distribution or resettlement program for them by the United Nations?
No, I think the Rohingyas is a very specific situation. So at the moment, there is no resettlement program because, in a way, we want Myanmar to take responsibility for the citizens of Myanmar that were supposed to be citizens. It's a class that has been suffering tremendously in the past. So there is small resettlement programs, but they're mainly token programs.
Professor Baude, what do you think? Like, rich countries, they decide, okay, Canada wants the educated ones, Norway wants the women, Sweden wants this and this. Is this a sustainable way of...
Well, you kind of... I think you answered your own question. But I suspect that Norway, I don't know too much about the Norwegian situation, but I suspect that Norway has a very similar geographical location. And Canada is very privileged in terms of its geography. It has 3 oceans, it's surrounded by 3 oceans, US to the south. And people rarely arrive on boats in Canada. So you have to find a way to come to Canada first to claim asylum and receive it then. And that is a situation where, of course, Canada can say, "Oh yes, we're gonna welcome." There was a program with Syrian refugees. Initially, the Trudeau government said we want 30,000 refugees.
Yeah.
And to me, that was again the nation state comes in as a nation building process that is similar to Merkel's Wir schaffen das. Saying that we can do this as Canadians, and we can all rally around this. It's our common cause, and we can feel good about Canada that we're doing this collectively. As soon as enough people were there, they put the lid on, and it became 50 or 60,000. Don't quote me on the numbers. And then they said, "Okay, that's enough. Now we've achieved our nation-building aim, and that's it." I think other countries don't have that luxury. And I suspect that Norway is in probably a similar situation. Correct me if I'm wrong, but they're not the neighboring countries that are receiving massive amounts. It's not that there's in Canada or Norway, 10% of the population are refugees.
Dr. Attar, if Norway or other rich countries, they want to help, their first priority is to help in the neighboring countries where the refugees flee from. What kind of help do the people you meet need? What kind of help can be given? What do you think is most important? What do you see on the ground?
Yeah, I think I've spoken about the basic needs of human beings. It's not only for those refugees, also for ourselves. They need shelter, they need food, because security is already supposed to be there. And they need, of course, now health services. They need education. These are the basics that they need. And then out of that, and I think that there was an idea that if we can get them, jobs, it will help them a lot. In some camps, the hosting country gives them a chance and give them a piece of land where they will be, after a few years, they will be independent. I think if we do that one, it will help their situation. Because at the moment, all what they depend only on this, the general food distribution from UNHCR, which is giving them the food. And that food sometimes is not enough. Because I think the growth also in the camps, the population growth. Even if there is the registrations normally which occurs to include those who have come and so on. So it is really necessary to create something. Staying idle in those camps is also another, it's a real problem.
And in the area where you are, because when I read your presentation, yeah, I was really surprised that you've won this prestigious award and you don't have an X-ray machine that works still.
Yes.
And there's no country or nobody has donated any money for it?
We had an X-ray machine, which is a digital X-ray machine. It got broken. But what we're thinking now is that we should have 2. One of them will be actually a backup. In case one has broken down, we'll be using the second. This is exactly the way we are going to.
This is the man.
Yeah.
Thank you.
You know, I'm a politician now. But before I got politician, I was an X-ray technician.
Oh, that's great.
I didn't know.
That's great.
Yeah.
Thanks. Well, just to say that the High Commissioner, Mr. Filippo Grandi, indeed visited Norway less than 10 days ago. He also met with parliamentary committees. He met with Mr. Gharahkhani. And of course, he thanked Norway for their important contribution, not just financially, not just for the political support, also for the political support that Norway actually tries to solve conflicts. They are active in South Sudan. I mentioned also before Geir Pedersen for Syria and so on. He thanked them for that. He thanked them for the development assistance. He thanked them for the funding. But he also asked, do not chip away at the foundation of the global refugee system. Do not, for short-term gains, throw that overboard. Therefore, don't start to speculate in creating new systems, parallel systems. Don't believe these various, navigate it with us and trust us that we're trying to bring it into the right direction. Stay the course, and that's what we're asking. The resettlement, just to look at the numbers, Masoud had it up on the screen, and some of you looked at it. It said 102,000 people were resettled, 102,000. Of those, 60,000 went to the US, or 70,000. The US is closing. The US is less than 20,000 now. So, we talk about 0.02% on the quota system that now is being described as a solution to the world's refugee distribution. There is no reason why we should start redistributing refugees all over the world in different ways. It doesn't work like that. There is need for joint investment, and there's need to preserve the right for asylum, the Universal Declaration for Human Rights, Article 14, which actually was quite a good resolution when it was adopted. Let's preserve those elements in a very strong and forceful way. And let me just make a pitch for the Norwegians in the room. There was a very interesting on the Norwegian website, regeringen.no, where Mr. Filippo Grandi spoke in a panel like this one with Jan Egeland and the Foreign Minister of Norway. Please go and watch it. I think it will also enrich you further from this debate. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Now we have 20 minutes left, I'm being told. So we'll open up for questions from the audience. There will be a microphone passing around. It's kind of dark, so I'm not sure if I can see all the hands. That's good.
Good.
Nice
Okay,
people.
so who should we start with? There, everyone says, okay, the lady in white.
Yes, my name is Miriam, and
Please try to have a straight question to one person, not the whole panel, so we can have more questions.
yes, my name is Miriam, and I'm from Russia, and my question is to Professor Nordentoft. Young people of 2019 will inherit very difficult situation, and you wished us good luck with it. I want our generation to succeed, and my question to you is, other than volunteering, spreading the word about the problem of refugees, what can our generation do to influence our government's policies to bring more justice and sustainable development in the future?
We'll take 2 and 2 questions. Yes? The guy with the long hair.
Firstly, thank you everyone for your insightful informations and presentations. My name is Mohammed Tahiri. I'm from Macedonia. I'm a journalist and anthropologist, and right now I'm doing a master's on civilizational studies, more concretely on history and politics of the Middle East at the United Nations Alliance of Civilizations Institute in Istanbul, Turkey. My question would be to the gentleman from the Labour Party and the gentleman from the UN. I mean, besides talking refugees, we know the numbers, they've become statistics. We don't care anymore, we don't have the humane instinct anymore. The thing is this, I mean, there are causes to all these refugees crises. They're not just happening, okay? And my question first to the gentleman from the Labour Party. You yourself seem to be a refugee. According to your surname, you're probably coming from a Middle Eastern region. Turkey is hosting 3.5 million refugees. And Turkey is not complaining. Turkey is still saying we have open borders. And they're making it, which is surprisingly, because Turkey is facing economic crisis and hits by Western powers. Yet they're making it. But what I'm interested in is Norway has a great capacity for education. And what the world needs right now is these Syrian kids who are influenced by the war needs to be educated in order not to have an educational crisis in the future. And I think besides helping the neighbors, I think the European countries, especially Norway or Scandinavian countries, should be directly involved in at least educating these children. There are hundreds of thousands of orphans which you guys can take in Europe and educate them, and that would be like fantastic. And my second question.
Only one, please, because there are many people here. Please.
Just another question to the UN gentleman, because it's really important. I really think this is important. The cost to all this is weapons, arms sales. Not only Norway. Norway is in a very small scale, but a lot of countries are involved in weapon sales. Why the gentleman from South Sudan is such an amazing person is because he had to face such a terrible war. And this war happened because some countries like Israel and the US and Sweden and Norway sold weapons for these conflicts to happen, which shouldn't happen. So I'm asking whether the UN will take steps to prevent weapon sales in such a huge amount, which is causing a terrible thing happening. And the last one is about the Uyghurs in China. Will UN do anything about millions, hundreds of Uyghurs in China getting into concentration camps? Thank you very much.
First, Mr. Nordentoft for the lady, and then Masood.
Sure. Thank you so much for your question about what can we actually do. Just wishing us good luck is not enough, and I fully appreciate that. You've heard about the girl in Sweden who started hunger striking for climate change, right? Who said the school should strike. That is spreading across. And in a way, when I was flying up here from Stockholm, I was saying, shouldn't we talk about a little bit that your generation should stand up for the oppressed, stand up for democracy, stand up for values? Isn't that the time that you try to unite? I know it's not easy, and I'm not asking you to stand up only for refugees. I think it is about democracy values, against xenophobia, in support of diversity, in support of every sexual orientation and whatever. There's so many dimensions we need to stand up for in the world. And I know it is difficult to say, I cannot make peace because I'm not there. But maybe we can all contribute at our local level and through networks. So I think through this body you are here, it is network creation, it is standing up and so on. It is civil society organizations, non-governmental organizations. I know it is not easy, and not all governments are looking at that in friendly ways. But maybe there are ways through common voices to try to raise that. So that would be my advice to you. I know it's a difficult sell in some situations, but I do believe that many of you in this room, Macedonia and other countries, can actually start doing something and make it spread and make a united front around that as a young generation, as a global cause. Try to link up on global causes. Don't get just into your own little national cause.
Thank you. Masood?
You know, I have been traveling all over Norway, working with migration and integration, and the most simple but difficult question or comment you get is, okay, we are talking about refugee crisis. If we stop making war, the situation will be different. And I know it's a big topic, but it's a difficult topic. You talked about Turkey, and you had a question to me about Turkey. And I think Turkey has done a very good job as a hosting country. They are close to 4 million Syrian right now. And what would be the consequences if we had not made the deal between the EU and Turkey? You had almost 4 million people trying to going to the death route over the Mediterranean, coming to Europe. It would be fatal consequences. And I think countries must help Turkey. And European Union are giving them 3.6 billion euros right now. I think yeah. And I think it's important to use that of education, as you said, and I think Norway must do its part, and I think we are doing our part, and that's prioritizing quota refugees. You know, Norway said yes to 8,500 Syrian refugees. We did that very early, actually, in 2015, and we must do more in the future, and therefore I want a system. I'm honest. I say less asylum to the border and more quota refugees. That's important for countries like Turkey that are housing millions of persons, or also many other hosting countries.
Thank you. 2 more questions, please. Okay, the lady in red. You? Here, in the front, second row. Second row.
The lady in red here.
2 ladies in red.
Yeah. It's a great political color.
Hello, I want to ask a question to the representative from the Labour Party. You talked a lot about how the quota system is the most fairest. So I just wonder what you think about all the refugees that are kind of excluded from the quota system. For example, people that have to flee because of climate changes or other, If you could say something about what your solution would be to kind of helping those people.
Thank you. Then the other red lady back there.
Thank you. My question goes to a representative of Labour Party in Norway. So you have also mentioned about the Dublin system, but the reality is that Spain, Italy, and Greece left alone without any support and even a seed of appreciation for all their hospitality. Can you think that all these facts and even all this information may lead to disintegration in European Union? Thank you.
Thank you. And just a reminder, the representative from Labour Party will be in Edgar Bar. So you just hunt him down. Please.
And the interesting thing is I'm not in government, okay. You know, in 2015, when we had the migration crisis, all parties, almost, in Norway, they came together. And one of the things they proposed was actually to take initiative to change the Geneva Convention from 1951, the right to seek asylum, because they thought that the system is not good enough for today's many refugees. And one of the first meetings I was in after I got the job as migration spokesman for the Labour Party, I came to Geneva and met with your organization. And they said to me, in the area where we have Putin, when we have a guy called Trump, I think you have heard of him, do not F, and I don't want to use that, do not F with conventions. But then if you do it, if you open that discussion, there will be no conventions for the future. So my answer to you is at the same time, when people say we should initiative to take climate refugees inside today's Geneva Convention, I think that's not wise. We need to help the 25.5 million people that are refugees today. We must be realistically. And we can help other people also, those fleeing from climate change. But then we have to do it through the humanitarian aid. And Norway is a country giving 1% of its budget each year. We are on the top on the world, and I'm proud of that. This year we're talking about 37 billion kroners we're giving in aid. That's good. And we must do more on what we see in climate change. And Norway is also in front of that. So I think that's a better way to do it, and at the same time prioritize quota refugees. And the last question was?
The Dublin system.
From the Dublin system.
Three countries.
Yeah. You know, in a world when we need more cooperation, you should support the systems, you know. Nobody comes to Norway directly with flights and seek asylum because we are strategically where we are. And people like, countries like Hungary must understand if we do not cooperate, we cannot have border control either. So we need the Dublin, we need the Schengen, and the best thing would be that would be common burden sharing. But unfortunately, it's not possible in the Europe today. And I think some parties must show leadership, and I think we have done that. Is it a perfect system? No. But could it be better? I think what we are trying to do is a better system. And I want to get the Nordic countries to go together, to show it's possible to get a better system. And yes, the situation about Italy, Greece, Norway is actually one of those countries that said we will take relocalization, what is it called again, inside Europe?
Relocation.
Relocation refugees or asylum seekers. We did our part, actually. So I'm proud of that too.
Thank you. Comment, please.
Yeah, just to make a comment, because I think it's actually a very good question that the colleague asked, which is that if you look at Europe as a ring, Europe itself cannot even agree on how to work within the ring. And Italy, Greece, and Spain are in the outer ring. We agree on that, right? They're sitting on the outer ring. So what's going to happen when we're going to say that we're going to close that ring? It's going to go to the next ring. And the next ring is saying, we also don't want to be left with a baby. So it's going to go to the next ring and the next ring. And at the end, we will have no refugees in the world. We'll have deaths. We'll have misery. We won't have that solution. So that's a major challenge. Secondly, just to answer on the weapons arms sales, because I think that the gentleman deserves an answer there. Frankly, this is not UNHCR, of course, but this is just the big issue. I'm sure that you use people, you're discussing that. We have two challenges in the world. We have many challenges. Economy of war, unfortunately, is a thriving industry. I worked in Rwanda and Burundi in the early 90s, and a machine gun was $7. The cost of life is not very much, and I'm sure that the cost of life is not, unfortunately, very much respected in South Sudan as well. So yes, we have an incredible industry that benefits from that, and why we're not dealing with it, I think you're absolutely right. And again, maybe it's one of these issues that the EU should stand up for. There is also the rich and poor gap, and maybe this is what we should be discussing as well. I think recently the statistic was that 20 to 25 people in the world owns more than the poorest 50% of the world. Where are we heading with our gaps in rich and poor and so on? What are we creating? We are all striving for wealth division, but I think we're leaving a situation where increasingly we're not bridging it, but maybe Harold has some perspectives on that. And just on climate change, again, a quick injection. Climate change, of course, these are not necessarily refugees to be moved across again the whole world, but we need to maybe look at land swaps, ways of accommodating territory. There are some islands that are disappearing. We've got to find a solution, but that may be a different solution than just a traditional refugee solution. It will also require global intervention. It will require global help, but it is at a very different scale than I would say people fleeing for persecution, other reasons. And just to say that climate change, of course, sometimes is also cause for wars and cause for refugee flows. So there's many things that are interlinked, but the pure climate change, let's just say, maybe you have a view on that, Harold.
Thank you very much. Two more questions, please. Yes, the gentleman in the orange, yes, there.
Hi, my name is Jihad. I'm from Syria, and I'm a refugee here in Norway. I worked for Trondheim Municipality for 1.5 years, and I have my work now, my private company. My mother-in-law worked for the United Nations, UNRWA, for 30 years. She is a 71 years a refugee in Syria and in Turkey. We're trying to reunion her, and we didn't find a real system which helped the senior ages to come to be with her grandchildren. The Norwegian system looking for my intact, which is not cover that amount, and the UNHCR need a lot of following, and I didn't reach to the point. Everyone says, I am not the man you are looking for. Try to find other branch and contact another UNHCR to help you in the same system, in the same UNHCR. Thank you.
And the gentleman in the glasses, yes? You are next. You are next.
Thank you. My question is pretty simple, actually. Like, could the speakers please comment on both global compacts, like what is advanced on, what could have been better, and the political feasibility of its implementation? Thank you.
Okay, we'll also take the gentleman with the cap.
Thank you. As the speaker, the doctor from South Sudan, he said we have to treat the refugee as a human. But I don't think in Western country or what they called it, the free country, free world, they treat the refugee as a human. I'm an example, as a Palestinian refugee, if I try to attend this conference with my Lebanese travel document for a Palestinian refugee, I will not. They will refuse to give me a visa. The speaker from United Nations talking about the hell in Libya. Who created the hell in Libya? Every single Western country sharing that hell. They send their armed forces to pumping Libya to give them the Western democracy. My question is, do you think, I'm talking about the forced displacement, do you think United Nations still have any rule? You don't think you are just a decoration, America and their allies destroying and the rule for the free war just to try to treat the result? The second question, I know when you try to stand up against them, as what happened recently, Nikki Haley threat the other countries or the United Nations, they are going to punish them. It means that they will shorten their finance. You don't think there is any mechanism to try to refinance the United Nations to try to stand up against US or any other country who has that veto? Finally, you don't think we need to restructure the United Nations system because we need to treat the problem in the source, and we need to treat the reason of that problem? You're working just as a first aid, but the problem, there is a country have a power going to the other country, destroy it, and leave it for the other world to treat the result. Thank you.
Okay, Dr. Bowder? No.
You want me to go first? Okay. Just quickly on the global compacts, probably. I did speak briefly about it. The global compact for refugees, the big difference between that and the global compact on migration is that the global compact on refugees built on an international refugee system. It built on the conventions. It built on an agency that has a mandate. It built on an ongoing action and so on. And therefore, there's a platform, there is funding mechanisms, there is ongoing discussions. The High Commissioner meets with all world leaders in the world. There is a system that works, and therefore the Global Compact was building on top of that. The Global Compact on migration is a bit different, and I think I'll leave, maybe Harold, if you want to talk about that, you could mention that. On Libya and the students' remarks, are we just a decoration? And why does United Nations not punish states? Why do the United Nations not just solve all the problems? I think I tried to explain before in literally the 7 minutes I had that United Nations is nothing but the combined will of states. The combined will of all the states is what determines what the United Nations can do. We have a security system in the world that is the Security Council, whether we like it or not. There are veto powers, and indeed some of the big powers of the world are engaged themselves in some of the conflicts. And it was like that in the past as well. So nothing has really changed in that area. And I think that if you say we only do decoration and so on, we still believe that we try to do good. We still believe that we try to bring some values in it. We still speak for that. We're still the voice of the oppressed. That's what we try to do. Whether we're successful or not will be others to judge, I think, but we don't want to give up. And I think that is also a High Commissioner's message. I cannot give up. I have to continue, even though it does look very bleak at times, when borders are closed, when people are drowning in the Mediterranean, and so on.
If I comment on the different global compacts, in Norway, the compact for migration was very debated before in December. I think you have to accept that each country, they must decide their migration policy themselves. That's the world we're living in, and you have to have respect for that. But at the same time, you need to cooperate more. You need to build work together. And many of these compacts, they have very good initiatives, but you have to go from word to action. One of the things I think is very good is you have more third country solutions. But are you actually trying to get there? Right now, it's difficult. So you have to work more politically, I think. You had a question about family reunification. In Norway, that's a part of the debate of how many is the total amount coming to Norway. The system today is that if you have parents, they have to be alone for coming to Norway. Yeah, she's alone. Then it's the law is like this, that then you can get your parents here. I don't know your case, but that's the system today. That means you don't have any other families supporting you in that country. Okay, but that's the law.
Thank you. I think we'll have, well, I don't think, but I've got the stop signal. So we'll have ending remark from Dr. Bowder and Dr. Attar, because there were no questions for you. So please.
I think I'm ready for the pub, and we'll just
Yeah.
pass it on to last word to you.
There's no problem.
Yes? Okay, thank you very much. It's been a great honor to have such honorable guests here and such a beautiful audience. Thank you, and we'll be at Edgar Bar.
Thank you.